Oh, yeah.
come and see,
Welcome aboard. Welcome aboard.
see what's up. I talked to Chris Fisher and I drew the short straw.
Oh, I see how it goes. All right, so we're the short straw.
I usually assume their car broke down in the parking lot.
Right.
Well, this actually will likely interest you. So.
Yeah, sure it will.
Commissioners, water banking. Last week, there was a flurry of activity and discussion with Oroville-Tonasket Irrigation District. I've got a pretty good handle on the path, if you will. This would likely follow. So let's go over that.
You want to turn that to slow?
Oh, I'm sorry. Everybody see? I'll see. So, what you have in front of you today is a marked up revised draft of the letter of intent. I sent it over and I have some hard copies here. The letter of intent would signal your agreement with the Oroville-Tonasket Irrigation District that you want to explore the formation of a water bank. You will contribute $10,000 cost share as part of the process of putting the bank together, and it would require us to put together an intergovernmental agreement outlining a number of things, but primarily what happens with the $10,000. Now, the reason for a letter followed by an intergovernmental agreement is right now Oroville-Tonasket is using Aspect Consulting to do a lot of their legwork. You have not issued an RFQ or gone through any kind of a vetting process to bring professional services on to do that, which you would be required to do. Rather than do that, it would be simpler to make sure, or to arrange an agreement with Oroville-Tonasket by which we have a clear understanding of the services they are going to provide us. What they have to do to accomplish those services would essentially be up to them at that point.
What
So,
trip there?
I'm sorry?
What trip to, Oroville-Tonasket?
I'm sorry. What, no, what? I'm sorry?
What trip to trigger on these guys to all of a sudden to say, we want to, go ahead?
Well, they sent it a week ago. You'll recall you were
Yeah.
contemplating it last Tuesday. Okay, I think I answered your question. Hold on.
Okay.
We'll get to that. So, letter of intent, first step. That is essentially the assurance that everyone's going to work together towards the end of creating a water bank. You'd have an intergovernmental agreement, which outlines the objectives and how the $10,000 would be spent.
Did Vanessa get back to us on if we can use the,
Well, hold on, we'll come to that, too, so. Let's assume now we get through the IGA, all right? The eventual end game is to create the water bank. Now, it will be Oroville-Tonasket's water bank. They do not need you to form a water bank. They're going to form the water bank. They're not going to sell you any water. They want to lease you water as startup for the water bank. I'll hang on to that thought, we'll come back to it too. The end would be a water service agreement, is likely what it will be called, which outlines how much water is available. So you'll have the number, obviously, the water rights they're prepared to lease you. How many households that'll serve depends upon what we'll determine is the amount each household will use against the amount of water that they have. They have to complete the conversion of their seasonal rights to a year-round right. And of course, the term. Now this gets interesting. If you lease the water, I mean, at face value, that's relatively simple. But when you're leasing water, in a lot of the instances I've had some experience with, it was ag water or something like that. Obviously, if a lease goes away, you just go find new water, stop doing what you're doing. We have to, there's gonna be some due diligence involved here. If you're leasing water as a potable water source for a single-family residence, while we might agree with it, and OTID might agree with it, if the financial institutions aren't on board,
Right.
it really doesn't matter. So, there's a lot of work in this stage to do. The idea behind the lease is twofold. One, they don't wanna sell their water. They wanna hang on to their water. Two, they're couching in terms of essentially I won't say stopgap, but as a solution to a problem, albeit perhaps temporary solution to a problem, to buy time for either you to form your own water bank or to find other water to go into OTID's bank that is of a different type, where they're not as worried about hanging on to it, where they can pick it up and sell it back out once the water right's been perfected. But that in very broad strokes is what they're looking to do.
So they're not looking for to sell their water or a long, I mean, so the lease, did they say, like, is it a 99-year lease, or what's the term?
No, because I don't think they thought about it in those terms. The, typical mortgage is 30 years. I'd be hard pressed to imagine a bank loaning money on a house if you only had a 10-year lease agreement for the potable water supply. Just, I may be wrong, but I don't think so. So, if we use that as a benchmark, we should be looking for at least a 30-year term.
Yeah, that would
Correct.
only make sense, because no banker is gonna sit there and tell you, okay, you get a 30-year mortgage, but you only got 10 years worth of water. I mean, it's just not.
Well,
I'm skeptical.
But the problem is that you're gonna have people that move in here and they get a 30-year mortgage, and then 5 years into it, they're like, man, I don't wanna live there, the
Yeah.
weather's terrible, and it's smoky and everything else. They sell their house, somebody else picks up a 30-year mortgage, and they still only got 25, and then you only got 25 years left on your water lease.
Now, another option, keep in mind, the devil's in the detail. Another option is that it's a very long-term lease with essentially a termination clause, cancellation clause, maybe is a better way to say it, that if other water is obtained, if you form your own bank, something along
I
those
just
lines,
see,
that then you can kick their water back to them or something similar to that.
Yeah, I mean, if
In
it was
that-
written
in that
up as
lease.
if it was written up as a permanent lease agreement, where if water was found to replace it,
It looks to me like you're just opening up a loophole for some lawyers to really make a can of worms out of this thing.
it could be.
Now, let's talk advantages, if you will. Advantages to OTID in doing it this way is the one, they're not giving up their water, even though they may be leasing it out for a long, long time, but they're not giving it up. The water bank also allows them greater latitude, should they obtain other water or other additional water they might have to use for different purposes outside of the irrigation district area and the boundaries of those water rights. So they can perfect other water or their own water for other purposes, and that would be eligible for use within the boundaries of the water bank, as opposed to just the Oroville-Tonasket Irrigation District. So that's their advantage, if you will. Our advantage is if we can pick up water for 100 households through the course of time that we're doing our watershed plan revisions, then that's mitigation.
Okay, but we're not picking anything out basically, because are they taking the lease money, what's the
Well,
monetary?
this is, again, devil's in the detail. There's a number of ways that you can approach this. Well, two primary ways you can approach it. One, that I believe it's the way Kittitas County's doing it, although I haven't checked up there for a while, is, and they obtained water right, they did the conversion, they figure out how much each house is going to use through the course of that forever, and they sell a credit against that water. So it's a one-time transaction. You now have you essentially buy a mitigation.
But they're not calling it, oh yeah, you've got it there. Long-term water service contract is the verbiage.
The contract's with you,
Right.
then that contract would spell
Yeah,
out the,
like it's the development of a long-term water service contract between the parties that will provide water from the water bank to the county for mitigation.
Yes.
Okay, I can follow that and understand that, and I think that,
So,
but if you insert lease in there,
well, but it's a lease. The water you're gonna get through your water service agreement is leased water. They aren't going to sell you their water.
well, they're selling you the water.
Well,
They're
perhaps
selling you the-
semantics.
They're
So
not
let's-
selling you the right, they're
let's
selling
look-
you the water
yeah,
on a service contract.
yeah, so let's
Otherwise
look
you-
at
otherwise you
irrigation.
just don't have anything tangible.
Let's look at an irrigation district. So the shares that you pay for the water,
Yeah.
that you're not buying the water right from them, they still own the right, but you own shares of the ditch.
Yeah, so you're
So can
buying
they
acre
take-
fee
Yeah, you're buying acre
on a
fee.
water service agreement.
Right, so can they just take that away from you?
The irrigation district, absolutely.
Well, so then that's the same principle then of listening to.
Those would be the sorts of things that would need to be worked out in the water service agreement with you. And then while it wasn't said, I get the advantage of that, rather than sitting down and working on an agreement with every individual landowner. I'd rather work out an agreement with you. And then you would essentially run a water utility. Now, whether you would charge a one-time fee to get so much water out of your water utility with your water provided through your agreement with OTID, or whether you would run it as a water utility where you pay a connection fee essentially, realizing there's no pumps or pipes. But someone would pay a connection fee and then a monthly or whatever fee for that water forever, are details that would need to be worked out. Now, the idea is that it would be self-perpetuating. Whatever you charge the individual landowner would have to be, one, consistent with your water service agreement, and two, theoretically, is something to put together a fund to continue the administration of your part of the water bank, to say it that way, to put money aside to get more water, and whatever. Their payment is, of course, for the use of the water, for whatever period of time we're talking.
So this is the hard part though. Okay. OTED has the ability to retime water through the dam.
They do.
You're not gonna find very many water rights, agricultural water rights, that you're gonna be able to retime like that for this type of mitigation.
No, that's accurate, it puts them in a
So-
better position to do something like this.
Yeah, so I mean, we could, we could say, yeah, we're gonna try to find water, but where are you going to find water that you can nowadays move to? If we're gonna do this, if we're gonna sign this, we need to have them back in here with Aspect and just go over some of this stuff, cause I'm not gonna sign something that says that, yeah, we intend to give you $10,000 because you want to lease us some water, and oh yeah, you'll be able to just do it this way.
Well, there was some discussion about skipping from the letter of intent, going straight to the IGA, intergovernmental agreement. There's a sense of urgency on the part of OTID's consultant that we need some commitment to even form the IGA. It's the IGA that triggers the $10,000. Letter of intent says you'll put it aside, and if we come up with suitable IGA, then we'll give it to her. How we'll work it out, whether it's payment for services or an upfront payment or whatever. There's some interest on the part of OTID to get into this grant application cycle, which maybe they've had other discussions besides those I've had, and they have a little better idea of what the structure of that's going to be. To your question, Commissioner, Vanessa, DOE, our grant manager, if you will, is going to ask if the local capacity grant could be utilized to help set up something like this.
She didn't get that answer.
She doesn't have that answered yet, or at least I don't have the answer from her yet, but, whether part of the $150,000 could be or no, she doesn't have the answer to that yet either. Of course, you can spend current expense dollars on any lawful purpose, so you could do that if you wish to. I'm not not suggesting that.
No, I know you're not,
Thing.
I see too many little gaps in this to,
There's a lot of work to.
yeah, there's a lot of work to be done, and it seems like that there's this push for us to get it done, because there's a lot of, there's the legislation, there's the $300 million, there's all this stuff, but yet, when it comes right down to it, we need to know the answers of lease and water, and what's the term gonna be, and.
The other pot of money, if you will, is supposedly $20 million through this cycle, whatever that.
13 million this cycle.
Okay, well, 20 was the number I heard, so anyway, is available for projects. Now, in my discussion with Vanessa, she seemed really reluctant that they would fund anything that was a feasibility or due diligence proposal, anything like that. If you had a water right that you thought you could buy, or some kind of project you thought you could build, that's something they'd be interested in funding.
Yeah, which this thing's ready to go, it's, the water rights can be the water rights can be
The
retired.
water rights are there.
Yeah, no, I mean, if you were to just purely say, yeah, I wanna buy your water rights, then.
That would probably be a
That would,
pretty easy one to put together.
right,
But that's not the proposal.
no.
So anyway, first step is the letter of intent. You have the red line draft that their attorney prepared after our discussion Friday morning. Our being myself, Mr. Owen, Tyson Carlson from Aspect, and Scott Detro, their attorney. If you move ahead with the letter of intent, of course, the language is there in front of you, but that specifically kicks off then the effort to create the intergovernmental agreement. The intergovernmental agreement would dictate what the $10,000 would be used for, what services we would expect out of Oroville-Tonasket Irrigation District, and what would constitute, if you will, the end of the scope of work for the intergovernmental agreement. Once that is accomplished, we would theoretically be looking at either we can't put it together, or we now have the framework of a water bank in place, and we would sit down and create the water service agreement. The water service agreement, again, would be between you and Oroville-Tonasket Irrigation District. Your part of the water service agreement would be how then you sell out water to people wanting to build houses or do something in WRIA 49 or some subset thereof.
Well, a red flag just went up for me.
A lot of questions that would have to be worked out. Not the least of which
In
is
your last statement,
whether
you got together with Jay O'Brien, yourself, and the attorney Scott Detro.
I'm sorry, what's that?
And the attorney Scott Detro.
Oh, yes. You know him.
Yeah, there's.
You know him now that I think about it, don't you? Yes. He's our attorney. He prepared.
So there's, if it's gonna be a controversial issue and something that's out in the public,
You may want to recluse yourself from any decision made.
Or abstain from vote. See, so these agreement, okay, so let's just look at the agreement. The intent agreement is to obtain long-term funding and co-develop an interlocal agreement on operation, permitting, outreach, and enforcement of the water bank that meets the needs of both parties. Okay, so immediately it's the intent agreement to obtain long-term funding. Duration of the agreement. This agreement begins on the date of the signatures. OTID has at least 100 acre-feet per year. Okay, agreement tasks. OTID and the county agree to pursue collaboratively funding opportunities from ecology, including stream flow restoration grants. In addition, OTID and the county agree to jointly develop the future interlocal agreement addressing the following. So immediately, the first thing on the list is to pursue funding.
They weren't specific in terms of how much they wanted to apply for, nor necessarily specifically what the money would pay for.
See, that's what I'm wondering.
But
because-
whether OTED is interested in an upfront payment for the leased water, or if they have their eye on some other water right that I don't know about, that they're interested in pursuing, I don't know. I can't speak specifically, because they didn't say specifically what the grant application would look like right now.
And then the types of uses that will be served by the water bank, I mean, they're running the water bank.
Whether, how much you want to get into that would certainly be one of the discussion points. If you're only going way past all the other discussions, if you're only interested in enough water
Domestic use.
for 100 single-family residences, then that's all the water service agreement would necessarily need to speak to. What they do with other water in the water bank could well be between them and their enabling documents with the Department of Ecology.
Yeah.
Now, you'll note they talk about the different things, updates to the county code, price, cost recovery terms, those sorts of things. That would be incumbent upon you to provide a great deal of the detail on that, for instance, how much water. We're right now using the 710 gallons a day that the aspect study generated, but we occasionally talk about using something different. Obviously, the amount of water each house would use dictates how many houses you have, or how much water you have to mitigate how many houses. So that'd be something they'd be looking for you to determine. What you would charge, how you would charge it is something they'd be looking for you to determine. The updates to the code, the reality is no one's going to buy a credit from a water bank or rent a credit from a water bank, however that shapes up, unless your code requires them to do that. So that would be amendments to Title 15, your building code, or 16, your subdivision regulation code, upon how you wish to shape that requirement up. And keeping in mind everything now is kind of a shadow plan with the watershed plan revisions, which are due by February of 2021. So this, on one hand, this it won't buy you any time, because you have till February of 2021, period. That would arguably take some of the pressure off the question of mitigation in the interim, although that said, 1691 says you don't have to worry about that right now. We will have to worry about that at some point in the future, whether this would be a nice starting framework or get in the way of that discussion, I suppose, is in my involved.
Well, I guess I have to see the term. I see that, number 5 states, OTID and the county agree to contribute 10,000 each to assist in the implementation of this agreement. So that means we're on the hook for $10,000 up front, no matter what, whether we can come to an agreement or not.
Well, and we can certainly, depending on where the commissioners want to go, in my mind, the intergovernmental agreement is where that detail will be found. This essentially says, we'll put $10,000 aside, and it should be, I read it, but we can make it much clearer, which we will give you based upon the terms of an intergovernmental agreement. So if we don't get a satisfactory intergovernmental agreement, I wouldn't give them the $10,000, obviously. Now, we can buff up that language if the commissioners want to see that.
To assist in implementing this agreement. Water banking letter, no. See, right up here, the water banking letter of intent agreement. Right at the very beginning sentence. So what they're saying is they want $10,000 to implement this.
They want $10,000 to partner element of the water. Now, this contains some of those expectations, and then, I don't disagree with you. I think we could tighten this up considerably, but the intent is that the intergovernmental agreement dictates what that $10,000 will pay for, how they will get it, when they will get it.
And what do we get for our $10,000?
Well, that's a darn good question. I mean, we'll outline that, if you move ahead, we'll outline that in the intergovernmental agreement, and what the end game of that effort should be spelled out there. If you actually want an operating water bank at the end of that period of time, we should specifically say so. Then if it goes beyond the $10,000 you've contributed, the rest is on their dime.
The other thing that you said in our earlier conversation that gives me some concern is you said when you met with these people and their consultant is the person that, you know, what's going on.
They may disagree with me, but that was the impression.
Anytime somebody like that, you know, it wants you to, let's do it now, well,
I mean,
all these questions
No,
answered.
I know, and see that what it is
I'm not
it's
going.
this timing thing with this money.
Well,
That's what it is.
Say the target.
I'm not.
The timing is
No, I know, I'm-
2021.
No, with this project money. So they're already starting, they're already starting
Yeah,
to.
right, everybody's,
Go through the process of trying to get buy water rights and
I
everything
know,
else. That 1691.
so it's kind of the bum's rush for the money, is what it looks
Yeah,
like.
that's
There's a sense that there's an opportunity to obtain funding from the Department of Ecology. Now,
Well,
Dep-
To the old adage of early adopters, and we know how much trouble we can get in by being the first guy to stick your toe in the boiling water.
Well, there's not enough questions that are answered for me to understand what exactly we're gonna get for the $10,000 and what water we're gonna get, or how long the lease is gonna be. I mean, just like we were talking about, it sounds like you're just buying shares of the irrigation district. And so do they have the power to say, well, we got a better deal now, sorry, you need to go find your own water?
Well, that's why you asked me, can it be taken away from you?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Just
So-
don't pay your bill and find out what happened.
Right. So, I think we should just have them back in and just go through some serious questions about this before we sign this agreement.
Let me see if I can get them back, a week from today, if that will work for the commissioners.
Week of Monday.
We have a public hearing on the 27th, don't we? Madam Clerk of the Board, isn't that our
Yes.
17A-290?
At 1:30.
Okay.
That's 290.
Isn't that our marijuana code
It
public
is our
hearing?
marijuana, yeah. So we need to have them in the morning or something like that, because that one's gonna be
Could be a long one. I'll see what I can arrange to get them back in.
Lori did respond. She said she'll be up around 4.
Who?
Lori?
for the.
Oh, right, okay.
Anything on water banking you want to additionally discuss? Well then, the next item on your agenda is the letter I sent over late last week to Director, and I have no idea how to pronounce his name. Suswing, okay. Regarding the wolf incident, as we've come to call it. We changed it consistent with our hopefully consistent with our last discussion. It takes the shape of an invitation to our meeting on September 10th and outlines some of the other challenges, which aren't necessarily USFWS issues so much as WDFW issues in terms of damage claims, predation claims, compensation, those sorts of things. The commissioners, your letter, commissioners of content, there are two blind spots, and then immediately at my disposal, that was the actual date of the incident and, the location. So, before it gets sent, we would want
I don't
to.
know whether Chris read it or not, but I read it. Did you read it in?
I haven't read it yet, no, so I'll read it before the end of the day here and let you know too. Real quick.
Now, in addition to the letter to WDFW, we did receive that email from Mr. Thompson late last week, which was attached a copy of a memorandum, I would refer to a directive, to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service personnel, regarding, if you will, your response priorities. Public safety people come first. Actually, fairly consistent with the discussion that you all had that one day. And then, if you will, it's the promise he kept, that he would issue something like that, which is, of course, part of the discussion on the 10th. Is to go over that memo and figure out now, how to codify that, if you will, amongst all the agencies involved. I talked to the sheriff, I saw a copy of it, and he had any feedback. And of course, he said he can make, he and/or Under Sheriff someday, or Chief Deputy Brown, will be in attendance. I suggested that Chief Ward attend as well, since dispatch is under his purview.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
So, then now, say this is the letter that would serve as the invitation to WDFW. I'll go ahead and gin up the letters. If you wanted the neighboring counties, the north end counties, Stevens, Ferry, Ponderay, informed of the meeting. And then, I assume the CC list we talked about before, the 7th District, and all of that.
DNR, Forest Service. I'll read about, I'll have an answer tomorrow for you, whether it's in or not, it's about to go well here.
Yeah. Well, tracking, really not much more to report there. Vanessa and I went over the application I sent in. They wanted a little more specifics in some areas, so I'll go ahead and polish that up a little bit and get it into them. She has some concern that I may be agreeing to do things I may not be able to do in the manner or the amount of time described. I'll go ahead and maybe soften some of that language. My predisposition is to hit it as hard as I possibly can, and we'll never get it done. But that said, I don't necessarily need to paint myself in an impossible corner either. So, anyway, moral of the story, I'll polish up that application and get it in. And we have not posted, we haven't done anything for that position. I have the other one already posted, but that's the current expense position, so we haven't started with this one. She, and it was all part of this same discussions where she's elected to go back to the group. You see exactly what, okay, let's string it all through again for summary. The $60,000 is the well tracking grant. Now, that is through June 30, which is their current budget cycle, but she said at least there's some possibility if we couldn't get it all done to extend that over the line into the 2019 budget cycle. So I'm not going to assume that because it isn't always her decision. The legislature sometimes dictates that. So I would rather hit it as hard as we can up through June 30, and then we'll touch bases and see what's going on there. That's the $60,000. The $50,000 is the local capacity grant, hooked to the watershed plan revisions. Her and I talked about whether that could, well, that could be used for something like this, to do development on a water bank or something like that. I mean, its primary purpose is to defray the expenses of the lead entity. So, in terms of watershed plan revision, $150,000, which is one-time money, is supposed to pay for the contractor or studies or whatever, depending on how you all elect to do it. We talked about the possibility of using Conservation District to pick up essentially where they left off with the first plan, or some other facilitator to actually do the watershed plan revisions. That's what the $150,000 is supposed to pay for. The $50,000 is to pay for the lead expense, a firewall between the two. The $50,000 is likely renewable money, so maybe $50,000 a year. The $150,000 time money. You're supposed to get your watershed plan revision done with that. So those are the three specific grant opportunities that I'm working on, and then there's the whatever, 20 million or 13 million or subset of the 300 million appropriated for how many years, that is tied to projects. You know, obtaining water rights for a bank would be one, probably pretty good example of a project, but under that banner of, lost my term, ecological benefit. What's the first one?
Net.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Couldn't pull that up.
You know,
Nothing.
You know what,
Yeah.
just thinking about that, so the county has the ability to apply for this money, correct?
Yes.
So we have entities that are in the watershed plan that also have capacity to be able to do projects that might provide mitigation.
Likely true.
So I'm wondering if we had a mitigation project that was already in the pipeline, that instead of something, and we could use it for net ecological benefit, but instead of going through the Upper Columbia Salmon Recovery Board or something like that for money, that we could actually channel 6091 money into this watershed.
I would think that'd be doable. You're wired more tightly into that stuff than I am. Any thoughts?
I don't see why not.
I mean, as I read it, they cast that net fairly wide, so long as in the end, you are providing that mitigation. We went through the hierarchy of mitigation. Water for water, same place, same time is the perfect mitigation picture. Water for water, close to the same place, close to the same time is next, on and on we go. And then the net ecological benefit element of that, where there's whatever, stream restoration, that sort of thing, as long as it provides enhancement, if you will, to the in-stream flow / salmonid runs, and that still may well ring the gong too. They're moving down that hierarchy, but it's still something they're interested in doing.
So that might be something that we should think about doing, you know, to get in on this application, just to see, because the Caldwells are invited to the, you know, to the watershed plan. If there's projects out there that people are aware of within 49, there's money available there.
Shar is more tightly wired into those discussions than I. Let me sit down with her and see if something pops into her mind. Not so much for a specific project, for a point of contact. I mean, the Caldwells are working on stuff all the time, so that would be a good place to begin, but depending on how, and I know the water service companies will want to not see a lot of things, providing that net ecological benefit. You have a leaky old cranky system and you can replace it with a more efficient system, they see that, and they're probably correct to a point, see that as mitigation. Some of the irrigation companies, I don't know so much up here, Medhow has had any number of irrigation district projects, mining and things like that. water to the point of delivery compared to the takeout. So anyway, a number of things I just kind of roll through my mind. Let me check with Char and see if something pops to mind. Maybe we'll come up with a list of contacts.
Yeah.
In terms of kind of drilling down to the next item on your agenda, Commissioner, we're beginning to get responses back to the letters I sent out. We've had some response to the ads that were published. At least one of the cities has contacted me. So they're beginning to form up. We're beginning to get names.
You're thinking by the end of September, you'll have the first meeting going?
That's still my goal. The names went up back by a week from today. Some have asked for, some of the cities, one of the cities in particular asked for a couple more days to jive with their council meetings, and that, I see no issue with that. My goal is to get at least the majority of the group in front of you and the initiating governments. You recall the arrangement we cut with them, for some initial vetting. That list we put together in terms of recommendation, the initiating governments will be asked to do the appointments. Then that populates our planning unit. We can get that done by mid-September. I'd like to get the kickoff meeting by the end of, or thereabouts, just to keep it moving. The first meeting will be organization, housekeeping. Do they want a chairman? How do they want to arrange their work schedule, that sort of thing. And then essentially a discussion of their mandate. And I'm still couching this in terms of a mandate. They don't have a lot of latitude in terms of what they're going to be asked to work on. They may have some room in terms of how they accomplish those ends, but they don't have much in terms of what they're supposed to do. That's handed to us by the legislature. First meeting or two to be to get through that, and then kind of working on a parallel course with that, discussion with the initiating governments in terms of how you wish to capitalize on that effort. Bring a contractor, so. We'll have to hustle. I still think we can pull it off. And of course, comprehensive plan, your next review is tomorrow at 3 p.m. We have marked up draft and the cleaned up draft based upon the marked up draft. You have not seen the new maps yet. We're still working on those. I think we'll have at least 2 of them, alternative 1 and alternative 4 done. If we get that far, I can show you what I envision, maybe is a better way to say it, for alternatives 2 and 3. So, if we can get through that, then it's up to the commissioners, obviously, but we should have a draft good enough, I'll say it that way, to go out for scoping. Keeping in mind that where we're at now is still creating the draft that will go out for public review. We haven't, a lot of public's been looking at it, but we really haven't had the official, this is the draft, please give us your scoping comments and that sort of thing yet. So we're still almost a staff work product stage. But if we can get through that, then we'll go out in fairly short order. I still have some fine tuning to do on the checklist. I'm going to issue a determination of significance and initiate scoping. So then that's generally a 30-day comment period. From that, we will glean our significant issues around which we'll write the environmental impact statement. With a draft environmental impact statement, and the draft will be prepared then to begin our planning commission hearings, where they will focus on 1, the draft environmental impact statement, and 2, the draft of the comprehensive plan itself. In the end, they will make recommendations to you We'll have our comment response and all that done with the draft environmental impact statement that comes to you in a package, and you look at that. Now, here's where some disagree with me. I would suggest we issue a final environmental impact statement before you adopt the plan. Does that inform your decision? Reasonably thorough discussion. Others adopt the comprehensive plan and issue the final environmental impact statement at the same time. I don't see that as making any sense, but we're a ways away from that, so we'll polish up that process. Right now, we're getting ready to embark on our very first public comment period. So, we'll pick that up tomorrow. Commissioners, that's your agenda. Anything for me? Well, okay. I'll go write more stuff. You look poised to say something.
Oh, I was gonna say that I was gonna talk to Chuck for a little bit there, so. I'll actually just get your phone, I don't have your phone number, I don't think.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Oh, you know what, I